The white satin of her wedding dress caught on a rusted nail as Charlotte Webb threw herself through the back window of the First Presbyterian Church in Abilene, Kansas, tearing a long gash up the side of the expensive fabric her mother had ordered all the way from St. Louis. It was June 1878. She was supposed to be walking down the aisle in exactly 3 minutes to marry Edmund Fairweather, the wealthiest banker's son in 3 counties, a man she had come to despise with every fiber of her being. Her boots hit the dusty ground behind the church, and she gathered up handfuls of white fabric, running as fast as her corset would allow toward the livery stable 2 blocks away. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat already dampened her carefully curled hair. Behind her she could hear the church organ beginning to play, the opening notes of the processional that should have signaled her entrance. Instead, it marked her escape. Charlotte had realized 3 days ago that she could not go through with the marriage. Edmund had shown his true nature when he struck one of his father's servants for dropping a glass of whiskey. The casual violence, the cold indifference in his eyes, had shattered whatever illusion she had maintained about their arranged engagement. Her parents had dismissed her concerns, reminding her that a woman of 22 was already past prime marrying age, and that Edmund's wealth would secure their family's failing ranch. She reached the livery stable, breathless and desperate. Her father kept a mare there, a swift chestnut named Delilah. Charlotte had been riding since she was 6 years old, and she knew how to saddle a horse faster than most men in town. Her hands shook as she worked the buckles, her ears straining for the sound of pursuit. Any moment now someone would discover her missing. Any moment now her father would come roaring after her with Edmund at his side. The saddle finally secured, Charlotte hauled herself up, the voluminous skirts of her wedding dress making the task nearly impossible. She ended up tearing more of the fabric, ripping it clear to her knee so she could sit astride properly. Propriety be damned. Freedom mattered more than fabric. She urged Delilah forward, bursting out of the stable and heading west, away from town, away from the life that had been planned for her since birth. The prairie stretched out before her, endless and golden in the afternoon light. And for the first time in months, Charlotte felt like she could breathe. She rode hard for an hour, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Abilene. The wedding dress was a disaster now, stained with dust and sweat. The train she had not bothered to bustle, dragging and catching on the saddle. She did not care. Every mile felt like liberation. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Delilah started to labor, her pace slowing. Charlotte knew she had pushed the mare too hard, but panic had overridden good sense. She needed to find water, shelter, and a place to hide before nightfall. The prairie was deceptive in its openness. Dangers lurked everywhere, from rattlesnakes to outlaws to the simple threat of exposure. She spotted a line of cottonwood trees in the distance, which usually meant a creek or river. Charlotte guided Delilah toward it, her own throat parched and aching. As they drew closer, she saw smoke rising from beyond the trees, a thin gray line against the darkening sky. Someone had made camp there. Fear and hope warred in her chest. It could be anyone. Cattle rustlers, drifters, soldiers. But she needed water, and Delilah was nearly spent. Charlotte dismayed, leading the mare through the cottonwoods on foot, moving as quietly as the ridiculous dress would allow. The camp came into view through the branches. A single man sat by a small fire, a coffee pot balanced on rocks at the edge of the flames. His horse, a beautiful paint gelding, grazed nearby. The man wore typical cowboy attire, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a brown leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. A gun belt hung low on his hips, but his posture was relaxed, unthreatening. Charlotte must have made some sound because his head turned sharply in her direction. His hand moved to his revolver, but he did not draw it. "Show yourself," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "I heard you coming a minute ago." There was no point in hiding now. Charlotte stepped out from behind the cottonwoods, leading Delilah. She watched as the man's expression shifted from wariness to complete bewilderment. His eyes traveled from her bedraggled wedding dress to her flushed face to the exhausted horse at her side. He stood slowly, removing his hat. Even in the fading light, Charlotte could see he was young. Perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair and sun-bronzed skin. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all strong angles and serious eyes that were currently studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you in some kind of trouble?" Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she possibly say that would make sense of her appearance? She looked down at herself, at the ruined wedding dress, and suddenly the absurdity of the entire situation crashed over her. A laugh bubbled up, half hysterical, and she clapped a hand over her mouth to contain it. "I ran away from my wedding," she confessed, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I ran away from my wedding, and I have been riding for hours, and I do not know where I am going or what I am doing, but I could not marry him. I could not." The cowboy stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been the start of a smile. "Then run toward mine instead with me," he said. Charlotte blinked, certain she had misheard. "What?" He took a step closer, and she noticed his eyes were a warm brown, like honey held up to sunlight. "If you're running from a wedding, might as well run toward a better one. Though I reckon we should get to know each other first. I am Caleb Morrison, and I work cattle drives between here and Colorado. That is my way of saying I am no outlaw, in case you were wondering." Despite everything, Charlotte felt herself smile. "Charlotte Webb, and I was not entirely sure you were not an outlaw." "Fair enough, given you found me camped out in the middle of nowhere." Caleb gestured to the fire. "Your horse looks about done in. There is a creek just past those trees. Why do not you get her watered and then come sit down? You look like you could use some coffee." Charlotte hesitated, but only for a moment. What choice did she have? Night was falling. She was miles from anywhere, and this stranger with kind eyes was the only help available. She led Delilah to the creek, let her drink, and then tied her near Caleb's paint where the grass was thick. When she returned to the fire, Caleb had poured coffee into a tin cup and held it out to her. Charlotte sat down, acutely aware of how improper this entire situation was. A woman alone with a strange man in the wilderness, wearing her wedding dress. Her mother would have fainted dead away. The coffee was strong and bitter, and it was the best thing Charlotte had ever tasted. "So," Caleb said, settling back down across the fire from her, "you want to tell me what happened, or would you rather I mind my own business?" Charlotte wrapped both hands around the tin cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. Something about this man made her want to talk, to explain. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes, or maybe it was simply that she had been holding everything inside for so long that it had to come out. "I was engaged to Edmund Fairweather," she began. "My parents arranged it. He is wealthy, respectable, from a good family, everything they wanted for me." "But not what you wanted," Caleb observed. "I thought I could manage it. I thought marriage was supposed to be practical, not passionate. But then I saw him hurt someone, saw the cruelty in him, and I knew I could not spend my life with a man like that. I told my parents, but they would not listen. The wedding was planned, the guests invited, the church decorated." She looked down at her ruined dress. "So I climbed out a window." Caleb was quiet for a moment, the firelight dancing across his features. "That took courage." "Or stupidity. I have no money, no plan, and nowhere to go. My father will be looking for me. Edmund will be furious." Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "I just knew I had to leave." "Sometimes that is all you need to know," Caleb said softly. "The rest figures itself out as you go." "Is that how you live? Figuring things out as you go?" He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, more carefree. "More or less. I have been working cattle since I was 15, lost my parents to cholera, no siblings, so I made my own way. It is not always easy, but it is mine. Nobody tells me who to be or what to do." Charlotte felt a pang of envy so strong it shocked her. That sounds wonderful. It can be lonely, Caleb admitted, but I reckon that is better than being trapped in a life that suffocates you. They fell silent, and Charlotte became aware of the night sounds around them. Crickets chirping, the soft rustle of leaves, the creek babbling over stones. The sky above was deepening to indigo, stars beginning to emerge like pinpricks of light through velvet fabric. You should get some rest, Caleb said eventually. I know you do not know me from Adam, but I give you my word I will not bother you. You can have my bedroll, and I will keep watch. I cannot take your bedroll, Charlotte protested. Sure you can. I have slept on the ground plenty of times. He stood collecting the blankets he had laid out earlier. Here, you are safe, Miss Webb. I promise you that. Charlotte looked up at him. This stranger who had shown her more consideration in an hour than Edmund had in 6 months of engagement. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Caleb, he corrected. If we are going to be traveling together, might as well use first names. Traveling together? Charlotte repeated. Well, I figure you need to get somewhere safe, and I'm headed to Dodge City to meet up with the cattle drive. It is 3 days' ride from here. You could come with me, at least until we figure out what your next step should be. He must have seen her hesitation because he added, or I could point you in a direction and you could go alone. But the prairie is not kind to anyone traveling solo, especially not someone in a torn-up wedding dress. Charlotte knew he was right. She had acted on desperate impulse, but she needed a real plan now. Dodge City, she said slowly. I suppose that is as good a destination as any? Then it is settled. We leave at first light. Caleb touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Charlotte. Good night, Caleb. She lay down on the bedroll, the dress bunched awkwardly around her legs. Above her the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and despite the uncertainty of everything, Charlotte felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or the first taste of freedom. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Caleb was crouched by the fire, tending a pan with strips of sizzling meat. He looked up as she sat up, pushing tangled hair out of her face. Morning, figured you could use a hot breakfast. Charlotte stood, trying to brush the wrinkles out of her dress. It was a lost cause. The garment was destroyed beyond any hope of repair. I must look a fright. You look like someone who made a brave choice, Caleb said, handing her a tin plate with bacon and a piece of hardtack. Eat up. We have a long ride ahead. As they ate, Caleb explained the route they would take. They would follow the creek west for a while, then cut across open prairie to intersect with the main trail to Dodge City. It was relatively safe country, though there were always risks. He did not elaborate on what those risks were, but Charlotte understood. Outlaws, hostile encounters, accidents. The West was beautiful, but it was also brutal. They broke camp quickly, Caleb moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Charlotte helped as best she could, though her dress hampered every movement. As she struggled to mount Delilah, Caleb cleared his throat. Not to be indelicate, but you might want to consider shortening that dress. As it is going to catch on every bush and rock between here and Dodge. Charlotte looked down at the dragging fabric and sighed. You are right. Do you have a knife I could borrow? Caleb handed her a sharp hunting knife, and Charlotte set to work, cutting away the bottom half of the skirt and the entire train. When she was done, the dress ended just below her knees, scandalously short by any standard of propriety. But it was practical, and that mattered more now than reputation. Better? She asked, holding out her arms. Caleb's eyes sparkled with amusement. Much. Though I think you just scandalized every church lady in Kansas. They will have to stand in line behind my mother, Charlotte replied, and they both laughed. They rode west, following the creek as the sun climbed higher. The morning was beautiful, the air still cool before the day's heat set in. Charlotte found herself relaxing, despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something inherently peaceful about being on horseback in open country. Nothing but sky and grass and possibility stretching in every direction. Caleb was an easy companion. He did not talk excessively, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often laced with dry humor. He pointed out landmarks, explained what to look for in the terrain, taught her how to read the signs of weather changes in the clouds. Charlotte listened, absorbing everything. If she was going to survive in this new life she had chosen, she needed to learn. By midday, the heat was oppressive. They stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a lone cottonwood, sharing water from Caleb's canteen. Charlotte's face was flushed and damp, and she knew she was getting sunburned despite her attempts to shield her face. "Here," Caleb said, untying a bandana from around his neck. "Wet this in the creek and put it on your neck. It will help with the heat." Charlotte did as he suggested, and the cool water against her skin was blissful. "How do you stand it, riding in this sun day after day?" "You get used to it, though I would be lying if I said it was comfortable." He stretched out on the ground, hat tilted over his face. "We will rest for an hour, let the worst of the heat pass." Charlotte settled against the tree trunk, watching Caleb through half-closed eyes. He was different from any man she had known. Edmund had been all polished manners and calculated charm, a veneer over something cold and hard. Her father was stern, uncompromising, more concerned with appearances than feelings, but Caleb seemed genuine, straightforward in a way that was both refreshing and disarming. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Sure." "Why did you help me?" "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Caleb pushed his hat back, meeting her eyes. "I reckon because you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. Does not seem more complicated than that." Most people would not see it that way. Most people would worry about propriety or what others might think or getting involved in something that is not their business. Maybe so. Caleb sat up, crossing his legs. "But I have never been much for what most people think. Life is too short to live by rules that do not make sense. You were in trouble, scared, and alone. What kind of man would I be if I just left you there?" Charlotte felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. "A man like Edmund, I suppose?" "Then I am glad I am not like Edmund." They rode on through the afternoon, the landscape unchanging in its vast monotony. Charlotte's muscles ached from hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. If she was going to make a life out here, she needed to be tough enough to handle it. As evening approached, they spotted a small ranch house in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney. Caleb studied it for a moment, then turned to Charlotte. "You want to try for hospitality or camp out again?" "What do you think?" "Ranch folk are usually decent. They might give us a meal and a place to sleep that is not the ground, but they will also ask questions." Charlotte considered. She was filthy, exhausted, and the thought of a real bed was almost unbearably tempting. "Let us try." They rode up to the ranch house as the sun touched the horizon. A woman emerged from the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was middle-aged, weather-worn, with sharp eyes that took in their appearance in a single sweep. "Help you folks?" she called. Caleb dismounted, removing his hat. "Evening, Mom. We are traveling to Dodge City and wondered if you might have space in your barn for us to sleep tonight. We can pay for the trouble." The woman's eyes lingered on Charlotte, on her shortened wedding dress and sunburned face. "That is quite an outfit you are wearing, miss." Charlotte climbed down from Delilah, deciding honesty was the best approach. "I left my wedding rather abruptly, ma'am. My dress has suffered for it." To her surprise, the woman's stern expression softened into something like approval. "Did you now? Well, good for you. I almost did the same thing 40 years ago, but I did not have the courage." She gestured toward the house. "Come on inside. You can wash up and I will heat you some stew. My name is Martha Gunderson. My husband is out checking fences, but he would not mind the company." The inside of the ranch house was simple but clean, furnished with handmade furniture and the kind of practical decorations that spoke of lives lived close to the land. Martha bustled around, heating stew and slicing bread, chattering about the ranch and the weather and how difficult the last winter had been. Charlotte washed her face and hands in a basin, scrubbing away layers of dust. When she looked in the small mirror hanging on the wall, she barely recognized herself. Her carefully curled hair had come loose, hanging in wild tangles around her face. Her skin was pink from sun exposure, and there was a smudge of dirt on her cheek she had missed. She looked nothing like the proper young lady who had climbed out that church window. She looked free. They ate dinner with Martha and her husband John, a quiet man who said little but smiled often. The conversation flowed easily, and Charlotte found herself relaxing, laughing at Martha's stories about life on the ranch. Caleb fit in naturally, trading tales of cattle drives and close calls with stampedes. When Martha learned that Charlotte had no other clothes, she disappeared into a back room and returned with a simple cotton dress and a pair of worn boots. These were my daughters before she married and moved to Topeka. She would not mind you having them. Charlotte accepted the gift with tears in her eyes. Thank you. You have been so kind. Women need to help each other, Martha said firmly, especially when they are brave enough to choose their own path. That night, Charlotte slept in a real bed for the first time since leaving Abilene. The mattress was lumpy, the quilt threadbare, but it felt like luxury. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb settling into the barn, and she wondered what he was thinking, this unexpected companion who had turned her flight into an adventure. They left at dawn the next morning. Charlotte now dressed in the practical cotton dress and boots, her wedding gown folded and tied behind Delilah's saddle. Martha packed them food for the journey and refused any payment. Just promise me you will live the life you choose, she said to Charlotte. Do not let anyone tell you who you are supposed to be. I promise, Charlotte said, and meant it. The second day of travel passed much like the first, though Charlotte felt more comfortable now, more confident in her decision. She and Caleb talked more, sharing stories of their lives. She learned that he had worked on a ranch in Colorado before joining the cattle drives, that he dreamed of someday having his own spread of land, a place to put down roots after years of wandering. What about you? He asked, as they rode side by side across an endless sea of grass. What do you want now that you are free to choose? Charlotte thought about it, really considered the question. I do not know exactly. I suppose I want to be useful, to have purpose beyond being someone's wife. I can read and write, keep accounts. I am good with horses. Maybe I could find work at a ranch or a stable. You could do that, Caleb agreed, or you could do anything else you set your mind to. That is the beauty of starting over. The world gets bigger. Is that what you did? Started over? In a way. When my parents died, I could have gone to live with my uncle back east. He wanted me to learn the banking business, wear a suit, work behind a desk. Caleb shook his head. That would have killed me slower than any disease. So I took the small inheritance my folks left, bought a horse and saddle, and headed west. Never looked back. Do you ever regret it? Not even once. That evening they made camp beside a small lake, the water mirror smooth and reflecting the spectacular colors of the sunset. Caleb caught fish for dinner, and Charlotte gathered firewood, falling into an easy partnership that felt natural, like they had been doing this for years instead of days. As they ate, Charlotte found herself studying Caleb's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. There was a goodness in him, a fundamental decency that made her feel safe in a way she never had with Edmund. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked, catching her staring. Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. Just how strange it is that 3 days ago I was about to marry one man, and now I am sitting by a lake with someone I had never met, feeling more content than I have in years. Caleb set down his plate, his expression serious. Charlotte, I need to say something, and I hope you will not take it wrong. Her heart began to beat faster. All right. I know we just met. I know this has all happened fast and strange, but I find myself caring about what happens to you, not just in a wanting to help way, but in a deeper way that I did not expect. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. What I'm trying to say is that when I made that joke about you running toward my wedding instead, I do not think it was entirely a joke. Charlotte's breath caught. Caleb. You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Whatever you decide to do when we get to Dodge City. Wherever you decide to go, I would like to be part of that if you will have me. Not out of obligation or because you need protection, but because I think we could be good together. Because when I look at you, I see someone brave and strong and interesting, someone I want to know better. Charlotte felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, overwhelmed tears. She had spent months dreading her wedding to Edmund, sick with the thought of a loveless marriage. And here was Caleb, offering something entirely different. Not a transaction or an arrangement, but genuine feeling, honest connection. I care about you too, she said softly. I did not expect to. I thought I was done with men, done with marriage and all of it. But you are different. You see me. Not just the version of me that is convenient or proper. You see who I actually am. Caleb moved around the fire, sitting beside her. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. So what do we do about this? Charlotte laughed, a little breathless. I have no idea. I just escaped one wedding. I am hardly ready to plan another. Fair point. Caleb smiled. How about we just keep riding together and see where it goes? No pressure, no expectations, just two people figuring things out as they go. I would like that very much. They sat together, watching the stars emerge, hands still clasped. Charlotte felt something settling into place like a key turning in a lock. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the suffocating weight of obligation, but the breathless freedom of possibility. The third day dawned clear and hot. They were making good time, and Caleb estimated they would reach Dodge City by evening. Charlotte found herself both eager and reluctant to arrive. The journey had been its own kind of cocoon, a space outside normal life where anything felt possible. Once they reached civilization, reality would intrude again. What if my father is looking for me there? She asked as they rode. Dodge City is a major town. He might think I would head there. It is possible, Caleb acknowledged, but Dodge is big and busy, easy to disappear in if you want to, and besides, you are not the woman who left that church anymore. New name, new clothes, new life. Your own father might walk past you on the street and not give you a second glance. The idea was both thrilling and sad. Charlotte had spent her entire life being Samuel Webb's daughter, living up to or failing to meet his expectations. To become someone new, someone unknown, felt like death and rebirth all at once. They were crossing a particularly desolate stretch of prairie when they saw the dust cloud in the distance, moving fast. Caleb's posture changed immediately, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. Riders, he said tersely. Could be anyone. Stay close. Charlotte's heart hammered as the dust cloud drew nearer, resolving into 3 men on horseback. They were riding hard, and even from a distance, Charlotte could tell something was wrong. The lead rider was slumped forward, clearly injured, and the other 2 were supporting him. Caleb held up a hand in greeting as they approached, positioning himself slightly in front of Charlotte. The riders slowed, and Charlotte could see now that the injured man had blood soaking through his shirt, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. We need help, one of the men called out, his face pale with worry. My brother got shot by rustlers. We are trying to get him to a doctor, but he is losing too much blood. Caleb dismounted immediately. Let me look at him. They eased the injured man down from his horse. He was young, maybe 20, with a gray face and shallow breathing. The wound was high on his shoulder, bleeding steadily despite the makeshift bandage someone had tied around it. We need to stop this bleeding now, Caleb said, already reaching for his saddlebag. Charlotte, I need you to help me. Charlotte had never dealt with a gunshot wound before, but she pushed down her fear and dismounted. Caleb worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound with whiskey and packing it with clean cloth. He directed Charlotte to apply pressure while he fashioned a proper bandage. "The bullet went clean through," Caleb said to the brothers. That is good. No lead to dig out, but he needs a real doctor soon, or infection will set in." "Dodge City is closest," one of the brothers said. "Can he make it that far?" "If we are careful and keep him stable, yes. We are headed that way ourselves. We will ride with you." The journey to Dodge City became a race against time. They rode as fast as they dared, stopping frequently to check on the injured man and make sure the bleeding had not started again. Charlotte found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed, helping Caleb care for their patient, speaking soothingly when he groaned in pain. By the time Dodge City appeared on the horizon, the sun was setting and the young man was barely conscious. They rode straight through town to the doctor's office, causing a stir with their blood-stained clothes and urgent mission. The doctor, a capable-looking man in his 50s, took one look at the injury and ushered them all inside. "You did good work stabilizing him," he said to Caleb. "He would not have made it if you had not stopped that bleeding." While the doctor worked, Charlotte and Caleb waited outside with the brothers, who introduced themselves as Tom and Jacob Hayes. They owned a small ranch 20 miles south and had been driving cattle to market when rustlers attacked. "We cannot thank you enough," Tom said, shaking Caleb's hand vigorously. "You saved Michael's life." "Just did what anyone would do," Caleb replied. But Charlotte could see the exhaustion in his face. It had been a long, difficult day. The doctor emerged an hour later with good news. Michael would recover fully. The brothers wanted to pay Caleb for his help, but he refused. "Just take care of your brother and watch out for more rustlers." As Tom and Jacob headed back into the doctor's office, Charlotte and Caleb found themselves alone on the darkening street. Dodge City buzzed with activity around them, saloons already filling with cowboys and drifters, music spilling out into the dusty thoroughfare. "Well," Caleb said, "we made it." "We did." Charlotte looked around at the unfamiliar town, feeling suddenly unmoored. This was it. The journey was over. Now what? Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. "I need to check in with my trail boss, see when the drive is heading out. But first, let us find you a place to stay. There is a boarding house on the north end of town run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She is respectable, and she will not ask too many questions." They walked through town leading their horses, both too tired to ride. The boarding house was exactly as Caleb described, a neat 2-story building with lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Patterson was a plump woman in her 60s who took one look at Charlotte's exhausted face and immediately offered her a room. "You poor dear, you look done in. Come, I will show you to a room with a real bed and a wash basin. You can have dinner sent up if you like." Charlotte turned to Caleb, suddenly afraid that this was goodbye, that he would disappear into the busy town and she would never see him again. But he took her hand, squeezing gently. "I will be back in the morning," he promised. "We have things to figure out, remember?" "Promise?" "I promise. You are not getting rid of me that easily." Charlotte slept deeply that night, her body surrendering to exhaustion the moment she lay down. She woke late the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of town life drifting up from the street. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory returned, and with it, a flutter of anticipation. She washed and dressed in Martha's borrowed dress, braiding her hair into a simple plait. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Patterson informed her that a gentleman was waiting in the parlor. Charlotte's heart leapt. Caleb stood when she entered, hat in hand. He looked tired but happy, his smile immediate and warm. "Morning, I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all. I was hoping you would come." They walked out into the bright morning, and Caleb explained that his trail boss had given him a week before the next drive headed out. "So I am yours for the next 7 days if you want the company. I thought maybe we could figure out what you want to do, help you get settled." "I would like that." Charlotte hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What happens after the week is over? You leave on the cattle drive and I stay here?" Caleb stopped walking, turning to face her. "I have been thinking about that. And I have a proposal, if you will hear me out." "I am listening." This next drive is the last one I'm contracted for. After that, I am free to do whatever I want. I've been saving money for years, and I have enough now to make a down payment on some land. Nothing fancy, just enough for a small ranch. A place to run cattle and horses. I was thinking of looking for property in Colorado, but there is good land around here too. He took her hand. What if you and I did this together? Built something together? Not right away, not until you are ready. But eventually? Charlotte felt tears welling up. You would change your plans for me? I would change everything for you, but this is not changing, Charlotte. This is improving. A ranch is just land if you are working it alone. But with someone beside you, someone you care about, that is a home. That is a life. She could not stop the tears now, but they were happy tears, overwhelming tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want that. I want to build something with you. Caleb pulled her into his arms right there on the street and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses Edmund had given her during their engagement, calculated and cold. This was warm and real and full of promise. Charlotte kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the hope and fear and joy of the past few days. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and grinning. So I guess this means we are really doing this, Caleb said. I guess we are. The week in Dodge City passed in a blur of happiness. Caleb showed Charlotte around town, introduced her to people he knew from previous drives. They talked for hours about their plans, their dreams, the life they wanted to build. Charlotte found work at a local stable, helping with the horses, and discovered she was good at it. The owner, a gruff man named Pete, appreciated her skill and offered her steady employment if she wanted it. You have a gift with them, he said, watching her calm a skittish mare. Not many people can do that. Charlotte glowed under the praise. For the first time in her life, she was valued for her abilities, not her connections or appearance. It felt remarkable. In the evenings, she and Caleb would walk along the Arkansas River talking about everything and nothing. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the small details that make up a life. Charlotte discovered that Caleb sang to himself when he worked, old trail songs passed down from other cowboys. Caleb learned that Charlotte had a sharp wit and a gift for observation, that she noticed things most people missed. On the fourth day, a telegram arrived at the boarding house addressed to Charlotte Webb. Mrs. Patterson brought it up to her room, concern written across her face. Charlotte's hand shook as she opened it. The message was from her father, curt and angry. Return home immediately. All is forgiven. Wedding can be rescheduled. Father. She stared at the words, feeling the weight of expectation trying to drag her back. Her old life was not done with her yet. Her family wanted her back, wanted her to return to being the obedient daughter, to marry Edmund and fulfill the plans they had made for her. She carried the telegram to the stable where Caleb was helping Pete repair a fence. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What happened? Charlotte handed him the telegram. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. What do you want to do? I do not want to go back, but he is my father. My mother must be worried sick. I cannot just disappear from their lives with no explanation. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then write them a letter. Tell them you are safe and happy, but that you are not coming back. You do not owe them more than that, Charlotte. You're not property to be returned. He was right. Charlotte went back to the boarding house and spent an hour composing a letter to her parents. She told them she was safe, that she had found work and a new life. She apologized for the worry she had caused, but was firm in her decision. She was not marrying Edmund. She was not coming home. She was choosing her own path. She signed it simply, Your daughter Charlotte. Sending the letter felt like cutting a final cord. There would be consequences, she knew. Her father might disown her. She might never see her family again. But the alternative was giving up the life she was building, the love she had found, And Charlotte knew she could not do that. Caleb's cattle drive departed on schedule, 100 head of longhorns and 6 cowboys heading north to Colorado. Charlotte stood on the edge of town watching them go, her heart heavy despite knowing he would return. Caleb had promised to be back in 2 months, as soon as the drive was complete and he collected his pay. 2 months, he had said that morning, holding her close. And then we start looking for our land. You and me. I promise. I will be here waiting, Charlotte had replied. She kept busy during his absence, throwing herself into work at the stable. Pete came to rely on her more and more, eventually offering her a partnership if she could contribute some capital. Charlotte wrote to an aunt back east, her mother's sister who had always been kind, explaining her situation. To her surprise, the aunt sent money, a small inheritance that had been held in trust, along with a note. I always thought you had too much spirit for that Edmund boy. Use this to build something good. With the money, Charlotte bought into the stable business and began expanding it, adding a few more stalls and putting out word that they offered riding lessons. The business grew, and Charlotte discovered she loved the work, loved teaching nervous children how to sit a horse, loved the smell of hay and leather and the quiet communication between human and animal. Mrs. Patterson became a friend and confidant, and Charlotte found a community in Dodge City. The women at church accepted her without too many questions, probably because Charlotte simply told them she was a widow starting over. It was not entirely a lie. Her old life was dead after all. The 2 months felt eternal, but finally Caleb returned. Charlotte was in the stable when she heard the commotion outside, the sound of horses and men's voices. She dropped the brush she was holding and ran outside, her heart pounding. Caleb was dismounted and walking toward the stable, covered in trail dust and grinning widely. Charlotte flew into his arms, not caring who saw, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. I missed you, she said against his neck. I missed you so much. I missed you too, every single day. He set her down but did not let go. Tell me you still want this. Tell me nothing has changed. Nothing has changed except that I want it more. I have money saved, Caleb. I am part owner of the stable now. We can buy land, start our ranch. His eyes widened. You are serious? Charlotte, that is amazing. They spent the next week looking at properties, riding out to parcels of land for sale in the area. Charlotte had never realized how different land could be, how you had to consider water access and grass quality and exposure to wind. Caleb knew all of this instinctively, and Charlotte learned from him, adding to the knowledge she was accumulating about this new life. They found their place on the 10th day of searching. It was 200 acres 15 miles west of Dodge City, with a good creek running through it and natural grazing land. There was a small cabin already built, weathered but sound, and a barn that needed repairs but was salvageable. Standing on a rise overlooking the property, Charlotte felt something click into place. This was it. This was home. What do you think? Caleb asked, though she could tell from his voice he already knew. I think it is perfect. They bought the land the next day, signing papers that made them joint owners, Charlotte Webb and Caleb Morrison, partners in business and life. The only thing left was to make it official in the eyes of the law and God. We should get married, Caleb said that evening as they stood on their new land, watching the sun set over property that was actually theirs. For real this time. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Charlotte turned to him, taking both his hands. Are you asking me? I am, Charlotte Webb. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not in some fancy church with a dress that costs more than a horse, but simple and real. Just us and the promise to build this life together. Yes, Charlotte said, tears streaming down her face again. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married a week later in the small church in Dodge City, with Mrs. Patterson and Pete as witnesses. Charlotte wore a simple blue dress she had bought from the general store, and Caleb wore his best shirt and vest. There was no organ music, no crowd of guests, no elaborate decorations. Just a minister reading the words that bound them together, and two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way. When the minister said, "You may kiss your bride." Caleb did, and Charlotte felt the last piece of her old life fall away completely. She was Charlotte Morrison now, wife and rancher and stable owner. She was exactly who she wanted to be. They moved to the ranch the next day, bringing their few possessions in a wagon. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. They spent the first weeks making repairs, fixing the barn roof, mending fences, getting the property ready for the small herd of cattle they planned to buy. The work was hard, harder than anything Charlotte had done before. Her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she had never been happier. She and Caleb fell into a rhythm, working side by side during the day and falling into bed exhausted each night, wrapped in each other's arms. Their first winter was difficult. Snow came early and stayed late, and there were days when Charlotte wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But Caleb was steady and patient, and they weathered it together, literally and figuratively. When spring came and the creek thawed and green grass began pushing up through the snow, Charlotte felt like they had earned their place here, proved they could survive. In the second year, they expanded the herd and built additional corrals. Charlotte continued working at the stable in town a few days a week, teaching riding lessons and training horses. The income helped, and she loved the work. Caleb hired on for occasional cattle drives when they needed extra money, but he always came home, always kept his promise. They were eating dinner one evening in their 3rd year on the ranch when Charlotte finally found the courage to share her news. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. "The doctor confirmed it today." Caleb's fork clattered to his plate. "Pregnant? You are sure?" "I am sure. The baby should come in the fall." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are having a baby, Charlotte, we are having a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted." Their son was born in October during an early cold snap, arriving quickly and loudly. Caleb paced the cabin while Mrs. Patterson and the doctor attended to Charlotte, nearly wearing a track in the floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the bedroom and found Charlotte exhausted and glowing, holding a squirming bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "It is a boy," she said. "We have a son." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny red face of his child with wonder. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Charlotte looked down at her son, this new life they had created, and thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. "Samuel," she said, "after my father. Despite everything, he was the reason I was in that church, which led me to you. Without him, we would never have met." "Samuel Morrison," Caleb said, testing the name. "I like it. Sam for short." Little Sam was an easy baby, content and curious. Charlotte marveled at motherhood, at the fierce love she felt for this tiny person. She continued working when she could, bringing Sam with her to the stable where he napped in a basket while she taught lessons. The ranch prospered. They added more land, bought better breeding stock, developed a reputation for quality horses and cattle. Charlotte proved to have a gift for breaking and training horses, and people came from all over to buy mounts she had worked with. When Sam was 2, Charlotte gave birth to twin daughters, Lucy and Grace. The cabin was suddenly bursting with life and noise, and they began planning an addition, more rooms to accommodate their growing family. "I never imagined this," Charlotte said one evening, sitting on the porch with Caleb while the children slept inside. "When I climbed out that church window, I thought I was just running away. I had no idea I was running towards something so much better." Caleb took her hand, the same gesture he had made around a campfire 5 years earlier. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," Charlotte corrected. "The best decision was when I chose to keep running toward you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over their land, their home, their life. In the distance, cattle lowed softly and horses moved in the pasture. Inside the cabin, their children dreamed, safe and loved. Charlotte thought about the girl she had been, desperate and afraid, tearing her wedding dress to ride away from a life that would have destroyed her spirit. That girl had been so brave, even though she had not felt brave at the time. That girl had chosen freedom over security, possibility over certainty. And that choice had led to this: a life full of work and joy, challenges and triumphs, and love deeper than she had imagined possible. Years continued to pass, each one adding its own joys and struggles. Sam grew into a serious boy who loved working with his father, trailing after Caleb around the ranch and learning everything he could about cattle and horses. The twins were wild and fearless, equally comfortable in the stable or the kitchen, climbing trees and racing across the prairie on their ponies. Charlotte and Caleb added that addition to the cabin, then another, until it was a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms and a wide front porch. They built their herd to 300 head and became known throughout the region for their quality stock. Charlotte's riding academy in town was the premier place for young people to learn horsemanship. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb surprised Charlotte with a trip back to the place where they had first met, that campsite by the cottonwood trees. They rode out together, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson, who was now like a grandmother to their family. They made camp exactly where Caleb had been sitting when a desperate woman in a torn wedding dress had stumbled into his life. Charlotte set up the coffee pot while Caleb started the fire, and they both laughed at how practiced they were now, how easy these tasks that had once seemed daunting. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky, leaving your old life behind. Charlotte thought about her answer carefully. She had received word a few years back that Edmund had married someone else, a girl from a wealthy family in Chicago. Her father had eventually written to her, a stiff letter that acknowledged her marriage and children but made no overtures toward reconciliation. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and Charlotte had not been informed until weeks after the funeral. There had been losses, yes, costs to her choices, but there had also been gains beyond measure. "I regret not getting to say goodbye to my mother," she said finally. "I regret that my children will never know their grandparents, but do I regret leaving? Regret finding you and building this life? Not for a single moment." Caleb pulled her close, and they sat watching the stars emerge just as they had a decade earlier. But everything was different now. They were not strangers anymore, not two lost souls finding comfort in shared uncertainty. They were partners, lovers, parents, ranchers. They were home to each other. "Here is to another 10 years, Caleb said, raising an imaginary glass. "Here is to 50 more, Charlotte replied. They returned to the ranch the next day to controlled chaos. Sam had tried to help with dinner and somehow managed to burn soup. The twins had convinced Mrs. Patterson to let them bathe the barn cats, resulting in scratches and soggy kittens everywhere. But the laughter and love in the house made all the mess worthwhile. As Charlotte tucked Lucy and Grace into bed that night, listening to their chatter about the cats and plans to build a tree house, she felt overwhelmingly grateful. This was what she had been running toward, even when she had not known it. Not just one person, but a whole life, a family, a home, built on love and choice and partnership. She found Caleb in Sam's room, father and son bent over a book about horse breeding. They looked up when she entered, identical expressions of concentration on their faces, and Charlotte's heart swelled with love. Later, lying in bed with Caleb's arms around her, Charlotte thought about that girl in the wedding dress one last time. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be okay, that the fear was temporary, but the freedom was forever. That running away was really running towards something better. But that girl had figured it out on her own, in a campsite by cottonwood trees, when a kind cowboy had offered her coffee and hope in equal measure. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb murmured sleepily. "Just about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You made a choice, and you were brave enough to follow through. Everything else just fell into place." Charlotte smiled in the darkness. "Not quite. You had to make a choice too. You could have sent me on my way that first night. Not possible. I took one look at you in that ridiculous dress with that determined expression on your face, and I knew my wandering days were over. You were it for me. Just like that? Just like that. They fell asleep, wrapped together, secure in what they had built, confident in what they still had yet to create. Outside, the prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. The same prairie where a runaway bride had found a cowboy, where two people had found each other, and where love had grown from chance encounter to lifelong commitment. The years continued their steady march. Sam grew tall and capable, eventually taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations. At 18, he was as skilled a cattleman as his father, with his mother's gift for horses. The twins at 16 were already breaking hearts in Dodge City while also helping Charlotte run the riding academy. Charlotte and Caleb grew older together, their faces weathering with time and sun, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good living. Gray threaded through Caleb's dark hair, and Charlotte's hands bore the calluses of a life spent working with horses. But when they looked at each other, they still saw those two people by a campfire, taking a chance on something unprecedented and wonderful. On their 20th anniversary, Sam and the twins threw them a party. Half the town showed up, along with ranchers from across the county. People gave speeches about how Charlotte and Caleb had built something remarkable, how their partnership had become legendary, how their love story gave everyone hope. Charlotte stood on their porch, surveying the crowd of friends and neighbors, and thought about how impossible this would have seemed 20 years ago. She had been so lost then, so certain she was making a terrible mistake by running away. But it had been the first right choice in a life that had been full of them since. "Speech," someone called from the crowd, and others took up the chant. Charlotte looked at Caleb, who grinned and gestured for her to go ahead. She took a breath and raised her voice to be heard over the crowd. 20 years ago, I climbed out a church window in a wedding dress and rode until my horse was nearly spent. I had no plan, no money, no idea what I was doing. I just knew I had to choose myself, choose freedom, choose possibility over security. And then I found Caleb, sitting by a campfire, and he offered me coffee and kindness when I needed it most. He said something that sounded like a joke but turned out to be a promise. He told me to run toward his wedding instead of away from my own, and I did. We built this life together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. So if there is any lesson in our story, it is this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward what you want instead of away from what you fear. Thank you all for being part of our journey. The crowd erupted in applause, and Caleb pulled her close, kissing her soundly in front of everyone. Their children whooped and hollered, and Charlotte laughed, feeling young and old and completely content all at once. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and stories. Charlotte danced with Caleb under the stars, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story. His arms were strong around her, his smile as warm as it had been 20 years ago, and Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice that day in the church. She had run away from one wedding and toward another. She had run from fear and toward love. And in doing so, she had found not just a partner, but a whole life full and rich, and exactly what she had always needed, even when she had not known how to name it. As the last guest departed and their children helped clean up, Caleb and Charlotte stood together looking out over their land, bathed in moonlight and peaceful in the cool night air. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, as he sometimes did. "Sometimes not a single one," Charlotte replied, as she always did. "You?" "Just that it took you 22 years to find me. Think of all the time we could have had." Charlotte laughed and nestled closer. "We have had exactly the right amount of time, and we have plenty more ahead of us. You promise?" "Promise." And under the vast western sky, on land they had built together, Charlotte and Caleb Morrison stood together, proof that sometimes the best love stories start with a desperate escape and a cowboy brave enough to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Their story had begun with a confession and a proposal, both spoken around a campfire by strangers who would become everything to each other. 20 years later, 50 years later, for all the years they had left, they would keep building on that foundation, keep choosing each other, keep running toward the life they had created together. And that was the best happily ever after Charlotte could have imagined, better than any church, wedding, or society marriage could have given her. She had run away from her wedding and toward her future. And what a beautiful future it had turned out to be.